I have here a brief details of my environment. So for primary, I'm going to use Dbvisit 01, and it is version Linux Server 6.6. The primary database name is testdb8 and it's using ASM. As for my standby, I'm going to use Dbvisit 03, and again, same version with my primary, which is 6.6. And I'm going to create testdb8 standby database, which makes use of file system. So before anything else, I want to highlight, when setting up Dbvisit standby, make sure that requirements are met. So please make sure to visit our user guide, which has all the details about the system requirements. So this way you will avoid running into issues later on. First, I will show you how to install the software on Linux on both servers, primary and standby. Start the Dbvisit related services. Then only then we can access the console, add the host, both primary and standby, create the DC file, which will contain all the parameter settings internal to Dbvisit standby. And I will touch a little bit on creating the standby database, just to give you a whole picture on how to configure the standby database from scratch. For the installation, I have here my primary and standby server running side by side. So first, I'm going to install the software on primary. I'm going to unzip this file. Make sure that you download the latest release of version 8, by the way. So it now gave me the tar file that we need. So we need to extract this as well. So you can see here that it extracted all the libraries and components. Now we have this Dbvisit folder, which contains a few folders as well. And the first thing that we need to do is to run the install -dbvisit executable file. So the installer will ask for a few questions, so make sure that you input the correct values. The first thing is the Dbvisit base directory. I'm going to use usr/dbvisit8, and I will enter 1 here to allow me to install the components that I need. So for my primary, I will install only the core components, which contains CLI, dbvnet, and dbvagent only. For the dbv server, I'm going to install it on standby server later on. So I will enter 1 here and continue. My local host name will be dbvlabs01, and I will take the default value for the port. For the remote host name of dbvnet, I will use the my standby server host name, which is dbvlabs03. Then again, I will take the default value for the port. For the passphrase, it can be anything, so I'll just enter admin here, and then enter. And now I'm moving on to install dbvagent service. So default values for the port again, and for the passphrase, I'll use the one that I entered for dbvnet. Then enter. And here is a summary of the components that are installed in my primary. So the only component that's not installed here is dbv server, which is okay, which means I can now terminate the installation process. If I now go to my Dbvisit base directory, it should contain the folders for each of the components that I installed here. So we can see the standby, which is the core component, dbvnet, and dbvagent. So after the installation, I now need to start the services. So I'm gonna go here inside Dbvisit and run this command to start it. And once I've done that, I'm now moving on to Dbvagent and run this command to start the service. So if I go back to run ps-ef grep dbv, I should see that both processes are started now. So we can see now Dbvisit and Dbvagent are up and running. So now that we're done with the primary, we're now moving on to standby server to do the same. So I unzip the installer, which will give me the tar file, and I'm going to extract this tar file again and go to Dbvisit folder, installer, and then run the same executable file. So my base directory will be the same as what I have in primary, which is usr/dbvisit8, then enter. Choose one to install the components. So here I will first install the core components, so enter 1, continue. Local hostname is dbvlabs03, and again I will accept the default value. For the remote hostname, I will now input my primary hostname, which is dbvlabs01, and again the default value for the port. For the passphrase, choose admin, enter. And now moving on to install Dbvagent. Again, the passphrase is the same, and then enter again, enter. So now these are all the components that are installed. I will not terminate the installation process. Instead, I will enter 1 again so I can choose to install DB server, which is number 5, and then enter. Make sure that you're using the correct hostname. So the default port number for DBV service 4433, and I'm going to use it. Enter, enter, and here you go. Everything is installed, so I can now end the installation. So if I go to my Dbvisit base directory now, I should have here four different directories. So I have standby, dbvnet, dbvagent, and dbv server. Again, no Dbvisit related processes running, so I have to go to each of them and start the service. So to start with, I'm going to start dbvnet service. Now moving on to dbvagent, start, and then the last thing is dbv server, start. Now just quickly check that everything is up and running. So yep, so it's all good. Dbvnet, dbvagent, and dbv server are up. Now we can I can now move on to show you how to configure everything on the GUI side. Once we have verified that all the services are up and running, especially dbv server, only then we are able to configure everything using the GUI. So first, make sure that you are using the correct URL, which is, in my case, https://dbvlabs03, where dbv server is installed and running, and the port number for dbv server, and it now gives me the home page, or the login page rather. So remember, the default username and password is admin and admin as well. This is the default during a clean installation. I now hit login button. It now gives me two enabled menus, which are manage host and manage users. So without configuring these two first, I won't be able to configure the rest. So first, let's start with adding the host. So I need to add both primary and standby. So we click new and enter dbvlab01, which is my primary, the passphrase that I entered during installation. And here you can see that automatically it detects Linux without me having to choose from the drop down menu. And then after which I can now hit this button. This check mark here is very important because it shows you that the host name is up and running, and otherwise it will give you if it's a cross mark or an X mark, it will give you hassles later on. You won't be able to do or to proceed with creating the DDC files. So make sure that this is checked and green. Now let's add the standby host name, which is dbvlab03. Passphrase is the same. It automatically detects it. Create new host, and now we're good. We can then go back to the menu. So you see that manage configuration menu is now enabled, which means I can now proceed with creating the DDC. Earlier I said that you also need to manage users, but this really is an optional. It's really up to you if you want to add more users and restrict their roles or privileges. In this case, by default, admin user is created with administration role. So that is fine with me. I don't want to add more users here. In this case, I will proceed with creating the DDC file.